Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project. My name is Chris Akers, and on this podcast, we talk about art, culture, politics, and sport, and anything else we can think of. Now, today's guest is a comedian from the US. I've had one comedian from the UK. I'm going to discuss with a comedian about comedy in the US. Is Lou Perez. I've watched a lot of his videos on YouTube, which are very funny, including a recent one, which we'll get into later. But again, Lou Perez is on the podcast this week. Hello, Lou. How are you feeling?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. I know there's a little bit of a time difference, so I don't know what time you normally go to sleep, but if I'm keeping you up, I appreciate you sacrificing for me.
Oh, you are. I mean, it's not too bad here. It's like 8 o'clock here, so it's not so bad. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Just like I do at the start of every episode, for those who do not know who you are, can you just explain who you are? I've already mentioned that you're a comedian, but what you do, how long have you been in a comedy game for as well?
Yeah, so I've been doing comedy for about 20 years. I started doing it when I was in college. Started out doing sketch comedy and improv, and now I do sketch and stand-up comedy primarily. I produce a lot of sketch comedy videos like you talked about, and also I'm an author of this book. It's called "That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore," which I think the folks in England will get the reference.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant song by one of my favorite bands ever, the Smiths.
Yeah. Cool. And obviously we're going to talk about how comedy is in the present day, but other than that, in terms of cancellations and whatnot, how has comedy changed? It's seen in the US change over the last 20 years.
Oh yeah, it's been huge. I think probably one of the biggest changes has to do with technology. So when I started doing comedy, improv comedy in particular, the goal would be, how many people can we get in the audience, in a live audience, to see us perform? And the same thing happened with sketch comedy. I was a performer at a theater in New York and LA called the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, out of which a lot of comedians came out of, very successful comedians. And if you were performing there once a week and had a packed out show of 150 to maybe 200 people, it was an incredible success. There's an amazing feeling of performing live, especially for a packed room. But it was like, man, this is what it's all about. And with that, there were the hopes of maybe an agent would see me and I could audition for commercials and TV shows and build my way up. So it seemed like that was sort of the path that a lot of people, had before them. And like I said, with the change in technology, the biggest one, at least in my career, being the advent of YouTube, where suddenly here you had this website, we didn't know what it was, where you could upload videos and, you'd put these videos out and suddenly you'd have thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people viewing your material. So the audience went from a goal of entertaining 150 people in a room on one night to potentially entertaining millions of people from all over the world. And I think that has been such a huge game changer for a lot of people, especially in comedy. And you see it also when it comes to, say, podcasting, for example, the shift from, being a comedian who would do spots on either, like morning shows to promote your work and to promote your shows that you have going on. And now you're able to produce your own podcast and get it out there to again, an insanely large audience.
So, and I agree with YouTube, and I will talk about that more in terms of not just in terms of comedy, but art in general, how that's used. But how the comedy clubs changed over the last 20 years? Because before, I could go to a comedy club and everyone would like it and stuff. And now it seems like you have to be a certain type of comedian with certain types of views and jokes in order to get to a comedy club. Certainly it feels like in this country. Is that the case in the US as well?
I have a number of friends in England, and they've talked to me about that, about, sort of being canceled outright from performing in clubs. And, thankfully in the US, some of like the major clubs out there, say for in New York, you have the Comedy Cellar. In Los Angeles, you have the Comedy Store. And now in Austin, Texas, you have Joe Rogan's Comedy Mothership, where these are places that I think are keeping alive the idea of, not necessarily dangerous comedy or anything like that, but really, protecting free speech and saying that we're willing to, bring comedians on who, push the boundaries and I guess do what comedians should be doing. So, fortunately, I think there's been a big, there's been a good amount of pushback against, the few vocal audience members who might be offended and decide to write a blog and try to take down a comedy club. Fortunately, when you do a show, most of the people are probably going to be there to enjoy comedy and are ready to be, to even hear things that they might not hear, elsewhere. So I think that it's probably like a small minority of people who get offended, and then an even smaller minority who get offended and make a big stink about it.
So it's not like, for example, someone going to a comedy night, being offended by something and then saying it on Twitter, and then the tweet spreads and that comedian's life is made hell. None of that happens in the US, or does it?
I think there are definitely attempts to, for that to happen. Fortunately, at least I've seen in recent years, it seems like that kind of stuff isn't getting as much traction as it used to be. And I think another, a reason for that too is a lot of comedians in the US, again, thanks to the technology, they've been able to build their own audiences. It's the elimination of gatekeepers has been just such a huge boon for everybody. So if you have a comedian who, for the past, 10 years has been building a devoted audience that, tunes into their podcast, sees them when they're live and shares their material, and, perhaps even, gives money monthly through, Patreon or locals or anything like that. When that person is, when that comedian is a target of criticism or a target of, attempted cancellation, if you will, well, now they have this whole army of their audience who's like, now we're going to come to defend this person that we support, that we love. And I think, that's obviously a great thing as opposed to, say you have a late night show or a network show where it might be a little tougher to defend an actor or a cast member on one of those shows, because the audience that's there, it's not necessarily one that they built up. It's sort of like they've been, when you join a show, I guess, like you're sort of gifted an audience that's already there. So it's a lot riskier, I guess, to put your stuff out there, because you could lose a gig.
I know in this country we've had what you call like comedy game shows, so like Would I Lie to You, Mock the Week, etc. Is that something that happens in the US? Because I can't remember anything like that type of show happening in the US.
I haven't seen. I don't know. I haven't seen like a comedy game show in a while. I have I have family in Leicester, actually. So when we go to visit, once a year, or in a good year, two times a year, oftentimes I'll be sitting in their living room watching the telly, and I'm like, wow, there's some really good programming. I think the English, I think you guys do a really good job of bringing comedians in for like popular culture stuff and shows like that. Are those shows quote unquote problematic? Do people get in trouble on those shows?
Not so much in trouble. Mock the Week has just been axed, because that was going in a very, very leftist, very that direction, so to speak. And I think people are just getting sick and tired of it, and that's being axed. I mean, we've had it going back from like possibly even the 90s with things like Nevermind the Buzzcocks, which is like a music version, to I Think It's All Over, which is a sports version as well. So we've had those sorts of shows going on for a while. Whereas in America, you talk about sketch shows. I know he's originally a British show, but something like Whose Line Is It Anyway? I know
Mhm.
I think that's still running now, if I believe. I think so. Anyway, so yeah, I've never seen that American like or game show, and I don't know. I think with the right type of format, I think it could actually do really well in America. I'm surprised nothing's been picked up.
Yeah, I think I've seen some programming on like Netflix will have some stuff where they have like a comedian host show. Like there's like I think there's a show called Is It Cake? Where it's basically bakers get together to try to fool people into believing their cakes are real. So I don't know how much depth you could have to a show like that. But I found it interesting. Like when I'm visiting England and watching those shows, like every now and then you'll have an American on, and I'll be like, I have no idea who that American is. I almost feel like they're like sort of a spy in a way. Like they've gotten into the English culture, and now they're on the TV, and they're going to be sending back secrets back home or something like that.
Yeah, every time you say the word cake, it reminds me of a show over here called Brass Eye, which was like this satirical affair show, political affairs show, but he's using it to make satirical points. And there was a famous episode involving cake, which was called as like a name of a drug, and they gave him like a sample of a drug, which is like a big plate, and saying this is actual sample they take to clubs and so on and so forth. And they were getting these celebrities to say this drug is bad when it was a load of crap, basically. And it's just trying to show how much celebrities will attach onto something just to make themselves look good, so to speak, without doing any research. So every time you say cake, it just reminds me of that show, Brass Eye, which is a weird one. But yeah, with America, as I say, we talk about problematic. I know there's been some issues over there in regards to comedy. Like was it Dave Chappelle who got pushed off the stage like a few months ago, and was it maybe Chris Rock, sorry. And Dave Chappelle with his specials as well. When did it start to become, because there's always been an issue sometimes with comedians if say they make a controversial joke, but over the last few years, it seems to have ramped up a bit. When and why did that happen at all?
Well, I think part of it has to do with everybody having access to get their thoughts out there. So I have I describe myself as a big defender of free speech, but I have a friend of mine who puts it. He's like, well, he doesn't necessarily think that everyone has something to say, which I think is fair. It's like we all have, or at least we should, have the right, to speak, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of us have, anything that's germane to the conversation, or, that something worth listening to. And I think, just with the rise of social media, everybody is able to talk. And one of the things that I found, just being on Twitter for the past decade and a little bit, the idea that I have access to people who have done amazing things in the world and have completely changed culture for the better or the worse, the idea that I have access to them, and that there's a chance that they might actually see something that I've written. Like I forget how many years ago it was, but I tweeted this silly thing out saying that I rewatched the original Rocky, right? The classic boxing film, and after rewatching it, I believe that Apollo Creed won that first fight. Really, just a really stupid thing, who responded to it, but Apollo Creed himself, Carl Weathers, who said, be peace. I think that's like, that might be like one of his go-to lines, just be peace. And it's like, in what world, is Carl Weathers, incredible actor and also this icon, responding to a stupid thing that I put out there? But that's the world that we're living in. And I think that, people are able to, to put their stuff out there. And I think there's something fun to being caught up in like a mob. I think there's that there's literal mobs and riots that people get swept up in, and it fulfills some really primitive part of humans to be destroying stuff and breaking stuff. And now imagine you're able to do that in a way, just from the from the comfort of your home, in front of your laptop. You can kind of get on and destroy somebody without putting much work into it. So there's something to that I think is a little that's a little enticing. And if you're a popular comedian and you put something out there, it's like, well, you've made yourself a big target that a lot of people can now maybe take you down. There's with the body of work that Dave Chappelle has, not many people can say that they've done anything near what Dave Chappelle does. But you could join up and gang up on him if you want, or if you're a very foolish individual, you could jump up on stage at the Hollywood Bowl and attempt to tackle him, which was a very, very big mistake.
It's interesting you link it onto that Hollywood Bowl, because I don't know how much stock to put in these claims, but as of this, according to his interview, apparently Ricky Gervais is doing like the UK tour at the moment, and he's having to increase security because of apparent death threats. Now, that just seems to me, that's extreme, very extreme. And I'm just wondering, I listen to his comedy and I don't find it offensive at all. I laugh at it, I sometimes cringe at it, but I wouldn't call it offensive. Do you think part of the problem is, and the same with Dave Chappelle, I think as well, that there's a lack of nuance in comedy these days, especially political comedy?
Yeah, I think that might have something to do with it. I think part of what I talk about in my book is that I really felt a big kind of sea change in comedy when it came to the election of Donald Trump, where you had a lot of people who sort of viewed Donald Trump as this existential threat that needed to be taken down. And if you're a person looking to help resist, that was the big thing, to resist this #resist. You look at whatever skill set you have, and for a lot of comedians, all they had were I guess jokes or punchlines. So they ended up sort of targeting Trump with the weapons that they had at hand, and I think a lot of them sort of got lost in that, and rather than continuing to do comedy, ended up just sort of spouting the same kind of talking points or the same punchlines, which was a problem. And I think something happened too, where I know quite a few people who are comedians and were not Trump supporters, and anytime that they would make a joke that could possibly be construed as being against their side, or a joke somehow could help Donald Trump, they were seen as basically traitors to the cause. So you had a number of people who would either just keep those jokes to themselves, or have to engage with people who are basically telling them that they will they're only helping bring upon the end of the world because they somehow made a joke at the expense of a Democrat.
That just seems very petty and lacking nuance, because even if you're on one side of the political aisle, you can still look at yourself and think, actually, this is what's going wrong with what I genuinely believe. And it seems to me, I know we're talking politically, but it just seems to me, even outside of politics, that jokes aren't like that now, or too few comedians are expressing jokes like that now with that particular nuance. I imagine, is that a big problem in the US, or is it a little bit not too bad?
I think I kind of feel like I might live in a bubble, in that a lot of the comedians that I follow, or the comedians that I do shows with, they're the ones who are continuing to say what they want to say. And I think I'm very fortunate over the past, however many years, to have had a career where I basically, produce what I think is funny and say what I think is funny. And it's been good for me. So, I might not be the, best, best judge of what's going on, sort of everywhere, in the States. But I think that, comedy now, it's sort of, there's like no better time to be doing it than now. And I think, for one of the reasons that you said, like, if most comedy being done is sort of lacking nuance, it's like, well, then, man, it's so easy. It's much easier to make your own stuff, make your own original stuff. It's just like, try to be a little nuanced, try to be a little, ironic.
Yeah, it's and going back to something you said earlier about gatekeepers and how we now, not just in comedy but in art, although I'll stick to comedy for the time being, you don't have these gatekeepers, but also you have a direct line of sight with the people who actually follow your comedy as well. So with that in mind, how as a role, I know you're not an agent yourself, but how would as a role of an agent actually change? Are agents actually needed now?
I know a lot of people who book their own stuff, who book their own shows. Like I've been booking my own stuff as well. But I think a thing that I think, like, a vital role that an agent or a manager plays is sort of unburdening you of having to, talk to talk to bookers and that sort of thing, where so that you can focus, exclusively, or at least, instead of 75% on the creative side, you could, focus maybe 95%, because there's always going to be 5% of you. It's like, oh, am I getting screwed over? Like that. So I think I think there is still something to be said, for management in general. But it's one of those things. Like, I've had a number of gigs where it was really, somebody reached out to me online and said, "Hey, I was thinking about putting together this show at my college. Is that something you'd be interested in?" And we talk, and we make the show happen.
Yeah, it's do comic because I was just thinking you've been doing this for 20 years. Do comedians have practice in that promoting themselves anyway, especially when you're starting out? In that you're having to book yourself, you're having to go to gigs yourself, or is it a case of you just turn up at festivals and fill out a form and try and get a slap that way?
I think, like everything, you really need to be promoting yourself. And that's a skill unto its own. It's something that I think um I could be I could be better at too. Like, even though my face is everywhere doing, doing all this stuff, um it's a skill that I think needs to be, learned and honed, and something that you need to be thinking about, because, ultimately, I mean, there's so many really, really great, talented people out there who you're never going to hear of, because they don't, take that next step in promotion, or making phone calls too. Being willing to to reach out and, try to get booked at places, and that sort of thing. There are a lot of people, I think, who, sort of stand in their own way when it comes to success, or at least, making a living at something, just because um, they might have, say, the guts to get up on stage and try stuff out, but they might not necessarily have the guts to make that phone call, or put themselves out there in a different kind of way.
So leading on from that,
Sure.
and I could apply it actually to all art as well, because a lot of artists tend to complain about being cancelled, or that there's too much wokeness in art in general, and I imagine the same with comedy. But at the same time, listening to you talk about YouTube and technology, and I'm just wondering, do you think, was to stick to comedy for time, do you think enough comedians take advantage of the technology that's available to them, such as YouTube or even something like a SoundCloud, where they could actually put their work out there and promote themselves?
Yeah, I do think so. So, I know some comedians that, I would do open mics with, that, weren't, big names, they're not on billboards or anything like that. And then you go and you look at, they have like a TikTok with, 1 million followers and like hundreds of thousands of views. And they're able to use TikTok as a way to book shows, to do branded content and that sort of thing. So yeah, I feel like nowadays it's like you have to be doing something like that, whether it's a podcast is sort of like, yeah, everyone's got a podcast, but for good reason, I think, but as far as, trying to use those platforms to get your work out there, I think that's really essential. And you see a number of American comedians, at least the ones that I've seen, who instead of putting out stand-up specials, or trying to sell a stand-up special to like a Netflix or some other streaming service, they'll put it out on YouTube. So they'll put like 45 minutes to an hour's worth of their comedy special out on YouTube for people to see. And when you turn around and you have 5 million views on it, it's like, that's a success. Like that's something that's really landing with people. Yeah.
I don't know if this was the case in the US, but I know in the UK from the 90s up until about 10 years ago or so, used to have a lot of comedy merchandise. They still sell the DVDs now, but it's like DVDs of stand-up and whatnot. Was that the case in the US? And if so, is that still a strong market, or do people just post stuff on YouTube and Netflix now?
I think, excuse me. Yeah, I think if you go to shows and you have comedians like trying to sell merch or t-shirts or, yeah, I don't know how DVDs are doing. But like, MP3s and that sort of thing. Me and my book, I carry some books with me wherever I go. I try to guilt people into buying my book. But yeah, that's something, that's something else that, you need to think about. It's like, if you're a comic, like, are you taking advantage of that? Like when you go and you do what sort of possibilities are before you if you go out and do a show in front of 100 people who really like what you did?
Yeah.
Like I find that when you entertain people and you show them a good time, they want to support you and want to bring back a memory, so almost like a talisman that they were there that night. So that's something I need to figure out t-shirts or something. I got to figure out maybe that's what maybe I'll figure out t-shirts, and then it'll just completely change my career. So I just get into the t-shirt business.
So what, I know you've talked about YouTube, but what actually led you to YouTube from going from stand-up? I know you briefly mentioned something like at the beginning of this interview, but what led you to actually put your stuff on YouTube?
Yeah, so I did improv and sketch like long before I even tried stand up. So stand up was something that I really needed to get the balls to get up there and do it. And YouTube, I think it was, I forget what year was it, 2008 or maybe even before that. I forget, but we had a member of our sketch troupe that had told us about this, and another sketch group was putting up videos.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, what a cool idea. And when we first started putting videos up, my partner Greg, so Greg and Lou, that's us on YouTube, we were putting up like short promo videos for our live shows. So we weren't even looking at it as like, oh, this is a platform where one day you'll be able to make money on this. We were looking at it as like, oh, cool, here's a website that will host our videos so that we can direct people there for our live shows.
Okay. So when did that develop into, actually we can make money from these, from sketch shows? Was it a case of just using a platform to experiment and then you just took off from there?
Yeah. We it was, experimenting with the videos that we're making. So a number of like the early videos that we made, they were originally live sketches that we would do, and then we sort of adapted them for video. And then I think the big moment happened when we became partners, YouTube partners. We were, I guess, one of the groups that were approached by YouTube. I forget how many were, probably hundreds. Where the idea was, continue to put stuff up, and we'll share a part of ad revenue, with you, which was really cool. And the relationship that we had with YouTube, years later, when my partner and I were both living out in Los Angeles, like we would be able to use the YouTube spaces to shoot stuff, to edit. So it was yeah, we had a good, a good time. And it was something that, we didn't see that, we didn't predict that, that's not how my mind works. I don't know what's going to be the next big thing technologically.
Yeah, I think the way YouTube has changed a lot of things, especially art, has just been incredible. And I just wonder, actually, because I've watched some of your sketches, the latest one, the police interrogation one, which I think is very funny.
Oh, thanks.
But it just leads me on to an overall question is, do you think there's anything taboo that in comedy that shouldn't be discussed?
No, I don't think there's anything that shouldn't be discussed, but I think anything, like the more serious it is or the more taboo it is, it probably just offers itself a bigger challenge. How are you going to make this funny? How are you going to make this, good? So, it's something where, like even the most, quote unquote, edgy comedians, oftentimes it's like, when you look at what they're doing, it's like, man, they're putting in some work. Like they're really like putting some work to present this idea, to the public. So yeah, I think it's challenge yourself, but you also need the resolve to know that maybe something isn't working, not necessarily because the content is taboo. You just might not be doing it well. You just might suck at it. So sometimes you'll have like an audience that it's like, no, it's not necessarily the audience or snowflakes. It might be that you just suck, So then that's something you have to, one has to deal with.
Take it with all this cancellation that we have and so on and so forth. The one thing that hasn't changed is the barometer of what's funny and what's not is your live audience, or the audience that actually comment on the show and actually comment on the sketch, not just, oh, you can't say that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall I get, I like the feedback that I get. And I'm also like sort of in a position where if people really don't like it, it sort of offers me yet another opportunity to have some fun and mess with people. So.
Yeah, it's I just think the whole comedy world. I gave this example in another episode, but I think the audience has a lot more power than they realize. I went to see a comedian, it must have been about 18 months ago. And I just went to see him. He's a really good comedian. And he said a joke about a black person, which I actually found really funny. And I didn't realize I was the only black person in the audience until I laughed. And then I'm looking at the corner of my eye and everyone's looking at me, waiting for me to laugh before laughing at. And I'm just wondering, as you say, of the audience, they seem to be the most, forget about cancellation, but they seem to be the most powerful barometer of whether something's good or bad. And that's something that seems to have happened, been steady across the decades.
Yeah, well, that's funny. It's people looking to you for permission to laugh. Yeah, I've seen that as well in the US, that being a thing, and it's fun to play with that. Also, did the comedian call it out? Did he say like, okay, you can all laugh because the black fellow is laughing?
No, he didn't. Because I was sitting right at the back, but where I was sitting, I could see like the whole audience, and I'd spoken to some of them beforehand. And even the lady I was sitting next to me, she was kind of looking at me as if to wait for you to laugh. And then I just laughed heartedly, and everyone said, "Oh, thank God we can laugh." And it was just such a very, it was a funny moment, but it was a very surreal moment as well. Do you think in this, and speaking of laughing, do you think in this pressure of identity politics and whatnot, that you're not just expected to laugh at certain things, but especially if you're a comedian, you're expected to tell jokes about particular subjects based on whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, what your religious background is, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think there might be, some expectations on a comedian, when they step on to the stage, and I think some comics go along with it. And it's fun when comedians do play against type or against expectations. I think there's, a lot of opportunity there, especially for, originality, like the idea of like, okay, here's here's another woman comic. I know exactly what women comics are going to say. If that was the case, I think it would be pretty boring existence, for sure.
Absolutely. I'm thinking, I'm just saying about going back through the decades. Do you think there's a misunderstanding with comedy in that it's temporal? So, and what I mean by that is sometimes I've heard comedians being criticized for jokes they made so many years ago when the context was different, but we try and apply it to modern times. I think that I might be wrong, it might just be me, but I think I see that a little bit in the UK. Does it happen in the US as well, or is it a bit more nuanced, understanding of how stand-up works, that it's of its time?
No, I think you definitely see that in the US. I mean, and I think you'll see it. You see it a lot because there are quite a few comedians who apologize for their previous work. So like I think probably a good example of that is the comedian Sarah Silverman, who has apologized. I don't know if groveled is the word, but for jokes that she did 10, 20 years ago. And she's a comedian who really built her brand on saying shocking shit about race and sex and culture and all that. So it's a little it's a little silly to be looking at somebody who made that was their brand. It's not like she decided that she was a sweet cookie cutter comedian and then decided to go blue. Like that was her thing, and to see her apologizing for it, I think is pretty silly. But it's not even just like in comedy. I mean, just look at the way that history is viewed. It's like history is viewed now through the lens of our modern morals and ethics and the way that we do things. The amount of in the United States, I mean, the amount of statues that are being pulled down, not only of slaveholders, but even abolitionists. It's like you have statues where you're treating slaveholders and abolitionists the same way. So I think that is a very big problem just in general, because it's like when you look at the arts, when you look at literature, it does tell you so much about the time that it was being written, and that's important to know. To know history, to understand it. And I'd very much like to get back to a time where, without going back in time, I'd like to get back to a time where we do judge art for art's sake, and are able to have those interesting conversations about where that art was coming from. Like for example, like one of the best plays that I've seen in a very long time. It was a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest, and the whole cast was women, and it took place in a women's prison. And it was like, wow, this is like a really interesting way to to deal with this incredible text without I don't think they got rid of any of the dirty stuff in it. I think there was something there. You are speaking across time with with a piece of artwork and still making it new. And it's it could be a really incredible experience. So, and also I just want to say too, and when it comes to comedy, I mean, there's a lot of comedy that doesn't hold up, primarily because it's it's of the time and it's not funny. But when you're able to find something that is funny 40 or 50 years later, it's like, wow, how did that happen? How the hell did we do that?
Yeah, I mean, Richard Pryor's stand up, I think that's a great example of that, where I listen to it now and bear in mind, obviously I'm from the UK and I listen to it now and I think, my God, it's just it still sounds so fresh compared to even now from like 40 or so years ago. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
totally agree. Yeah.
yeah. And it's interesting you talk about Shakespeare as well, his subversion of his plays, because about 2011, I went to Stratford upon Avon. I'm not far from there. Went to the theatre there and I went to see The Merchant of Venice. And that was the original text was set in modern day Las Vegas. So, and there was actually one guy who was a Fat Elvis impersonator as part of the characters. And how they done that play was just incredible. I think Patrick Stewart actually was in it, played Shylock. So, yeah, I completely agree with you on that part. Going back to sketches as well, are sketch shows on TV still popular like SNL, or is that something that's losing viewing figures now?
I don't know what the viewership is like, but what I do know is that early on, like say like in the the early years of YouTube, whenever my partner and I had an idea, right, we always when it came to figuring out how we were going to produce it, what was always in the back of our mind is we need to get this out, whatever it is, we need to get it out by Saturday during the day, sometime before SNL comes out.
Yeah.
Because if SNL does it, then we're screwed. Then we just spent, like, we don't have, it's not like we have the money, the budget to be able to just spend all this time producing something and then have to throw it away. So it was like, we need to do that. And I can't tell you the last time that I even thought about that I even thought about, oh man, I really need to hit this subject. I need to get this sketch out because SNL is going to do it. Too often I don't think anything they're doing seems to be, groundbreaking or original or even more importantly, funny. Like every now and then they'll do something that really hits, and you could see like just how excited people get. They'll have like a video with like 40 million views, and it's like, yeah, but to get to that one video, there are just weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of nothing worth watching. So now I think when it comes to sketch comedy, I think all the really great stuff is happening online in some capacity. So now I look around at other creators, and I'm like, man, I hope so and so doesn't hit this subject, because I got a really good idea and I want to get it out before he does.
Does the US have a strong tradition of comedy on the radio? I know you don't have necessarily national radio as such, or they have big shows, but do you have like a strong tradition of actual of comedy on the radio at all?
Just in like I think like FM radio, where you'd have like like the history of like Howard Stern and the comedians that he would have on. So a lot of it would be like comics going onto a show and talk and joking around for for the length of the show, but nothing that I know of as far as like scripted stuff necessarily, like sketches or just audio versions.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Where's the weirdest place you've done a gig?
The weirdest place that I've done a gig. Oh man, if I had to think about it, I write about this in my book. I once did a gig in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is an area in Brooklyn, and I did it in the back of a lounge. So it was like a bar, and then in the back was a lounge. And I don't know what event was going on, because it seemed like it was like part fashion show, and then there was a table with a woman selling like lubricants and sex toys, and the host, his name was Time of Your Life. like that was his stage name, or it could have been his real name. If that was his real name, that's insane. But his stage name was Time of Your Life. He got up on stage and said, "Hey, what's up? I'm Time of Your Life. And who's ready for some comedy?" And then just like brought me up. And I don't think anybody there knew that there was going to be a comedian. So I had to get up there and try to perform comedy at whatever I don't know what this show was, fashion show, sex shop, something going on. And it did not go well. And I go into more detail in my book about it. It's one of the hardest times that I've ever bombed. And it sat with me for all these years later.
You just remind me actually about heckling as well, because I imagine a gig like that would strengthen you in the long run, because you think you can't get any worse than this. But going into comedy, do you think that heckling is something not necessarily that you want, but especially if you're starting out, that you expect? And if so, how do you deal with hecklers?
Yeah, I'm not that good at dealing with hecklers. In that I have a tendency to go really hard and really mean right off the bat, which isn't necessarily a good thing, because the last thing you want is for the audience to be like, "Hey, he was really mean to that heckler." Like we're taking the heckler's side. But fortunately, I haven't had to deal with any bad heckling in a while. I do like being able to interact with the audience and ask them questions and that sort of thing. I think for the most part, audience members know when it's time for them to interact or to literally say something to a comedian, and when it's time to just to zip it and be silent. So yeah, fortunately, I haven't had too many bad experiences. And for a while there, you brought up earlier Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. There are a lot of comedians who are like, "Oh my God, like, is this like, am I gonna have to learn how to fight? Like, what the hell is going on? Is this going to become the norm where just like anybody jumps up on stage and slaps the shit out of you?"
Yeah.
But then thankfully, when Dave Chappelle was attacked at the Hollywood Bowl, the dude who attacked him got mangled. And he, like I said, it was a very bad idea for him to get up on that stage and to try to do that. So I think thanks to Dave Chappelle, I think more comedians are safe now, because in the back of everyone's mind is like, maybe this comedian has a crew of 20 guys who are ready to snap some bones. So
I mean, comedy is just one of the things I just think we need. Absolutely, something that can put an art, like make you see the world in a different place and just brighten your day. And I just want comedy, especially over here. I think in the US it might be different, well, slightly different, but over here, I just want comedy to be better. No cancellations, none of that. If you don't like something, and so on and so forth. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Just quickly, what are you up to the next few months? I know you have your book out. Is there book signings to do with that? What are you doing in regards to sketch shows? Is there going to be any more live comedy? What are your plans over the coming year?
Yeah, so my book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, basically all over the place. That joke isn't funny anymore. I have some live gigs coming up in July. I'm going to be in Memphis, Tennessee, it's called Freedom Fest, and then in September I'm going to be in Tampa, Florida. If anybody is over that way, I know you guys are having a heat wave. If you guys want to go to a place that's even hotter than that, head down to Tampa. So all my live shows are on my website, thelouperez.com. And and I'm producing some really funny sketch comedy with a group called Free the People. And we have a series called Comedy is Murder. So every month there's going to be at least one new video from them. So if you guys want to check out my sketch comedy, that's what I'm working on.
Cool. What I'll do, I'll leave a link to your website in the description, and I'll also leave a link to the sketch you did with Free the People, the interrogation sketch, which is excellent. Lou Perez, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you're a busy person, so this is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.